Ladies and gentlemen, today is Friday, March the 6th. We have 4 days left until the CBA deadline given by the WNBA to the WNBA Players Association. If we don't meet that deadline, that means that we are necessarily going to start losing games to start the regular season. So of course you would think that the WNBA Players Association would be moving heaven and earth to try and get a proposal done, right? That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the CC Report. And today we are 4 days away from the CBA deadline, 4 days away from potentially losing games if there is not a handshake agreement reached between the WNBA Players Association and the WNBA. And I just want to start out by giving an overview of the state of play, specifically from the Players Association standpoint. We have a Players Association right now that is in damage control mode. We have a Players Association right now that is more concerned with papering over the fractures within its player base than it is even with continuing to negotiate with the league. We have a Players Association right now that is in complete disarray. And the idea that the Players Association would be able to get itself together enough to even turn its attention to the league's proposal, let alone to finding a compromise deal that would be satisfactory to both the league and to the Players Association, seems pretty unrealistic right now. Frankly, it seems pretty unrealistic right now that the Players Association would be able to even propose a deal that would be acceptable to all of their membership, because you have at least 2, if not more, distinct factions within the Players Association. One faction being to dead set on a strike, absolutely willing to go to the mat to get as much as they possibly can, meaning their 30% gross revenue share or even the 26% gross revenue share that they had previously come down to, versus a faction of the player base that wants to play basketball, a fraction of the player base that understands that a compromise needs to be reached, a fraction of the player base that is ready to come to the table and actually negotiate on the league's terms, as opposed to trying and forcing the league to go over to their terms. So that's where we are right now. We have a Players Association that does not know how to move forward from here. And so it's not great. It's not great. It's not a great situation, especially with 4 days left on the clock before we necessarily start losing regular season games in the WNBA season. It's not looking good from the standpoint of those players that want to come to the table. It's not looking good from a fan standpoint. But that is unfortunately where we are. Let's start out with the initial reaction to the letter that Kelsey, Plum, and Breanna Stewart sent to the league 3 days ago now. That letter was leaked to ESPN late on Tuesday evening, and the reaction to that has been swift. And the reaction to that has been massive in terms of the WNBA trying to do damage control. In fact, they're doing so much damage control that all it's doing is further underlining the problems that were posited by the letter in the first place, instead of trying to do anything to solve those problems. We first saw Alysha Clark going on Threads and later going on ESPN saying that essentially there was no problem. We saw Lexie Brown making posts on Twitter and making posts on Instagram, essentially saying the same sort of thing, that there was no problem, that there was no division, and in fact that the only division that there was between players that came to the meeting and quote-unquote got educated versus players that didn't come to the meeting. All of these statements included some sort of, we the players that are in this specific subset or that specific subset, which in my mind just further underlines the problem, which is that there is inherent division within the player base that is real or imagined. But there can be no division in the player base in order to present a credible strike threat, because regardless of whether you are a player that you feel has been educated or not educated, whether you are in the 1% or whether you are just barely hanging on in the league, or whether you're part of the league's middle class, or whoever you are, You need to be united in the threat of a strike in order for the threat of a strike to be credible, and it simply is not right now because all of these player divisions that have been highlighted and have been deepened by not only the letter that Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart sent to the league, not only by the letters that the player agents sent to the league last week, but by the WNBPA's reaction to these letters by simply saying and denying that these divisions exist. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the official statement regarding all of this. This was released on March the 4th, and it reads, "In every CBA negotiation, the goal of the league and teams is to divide the players. These negotiations are no different. We remain united and focused on delivering a transformational CBA for all members of this union and are committed to negotiating for as long as it takes. Despite our differences and tough moments, we must make crystal clear that we are focused, we are resolute, and we are together. We want to play basketball in 2026. We want to be in front of our fans playing the game that we love. We will not stop fighting. There is no WNBA without the players." And it is signed by the entire executive committee, including Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart. If this is the Players Association's best attempt at damage control, then I don't think that it's any wonder why they can't get anything done in the negotiating room, because it doesn't fundamentally address the problems that were outlined in Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart's letter, right? In fact, it only serves to underline them by hand-waving and saying that the evidence of your own eyes, don't believe it, only believe what we are telling you. We already know that there is fracturing within the player base. We can see it in real time with Alysha Clark and Lexie Brown's statements on social media. We can see it in interviews that Breanna Stewart and Kelsey Plum were doing 2 days ago. We could see it in the reporting that Annie Constable and Alexa Philippou have been doing for months now. We see that there is fracturing that exists. And so releasing a statement that's saying there's actually no fracturing happening, it's all a league ploy, this is not effective messaging to anybody that's been paying attention. And it's not effective messaging in terms of messaging to the league, to the side on the other end of the table. Because if I don't believe that it's effective messaging, and if I can still see the fracturing, I'm just an outside observer. I have no inside sources in the WNBA or the Players Association. The WNBA, on the other hand, definitely can see the fracturing that's happening in the player base, and all they're doing is sitting back and watching as the Players Association self-immolates. And that is exactly playing into the hands of the league. And it's basically proving the point that Kelsey Plum and Breanna Stewart were making, which is that if you have an opinion that is outside of the official position of the Players Association, then you are forced to come back into lockstep, and then you are forced to toe the party line, essentially, and there is no dissension that will be tolerated. This is not healthy. The only healthy approach would have been to not say anything at all and rather deal with this fracturing and saying that we hear you, we understand, and we want to make things better. But that's not the approach that the Players Association has taken. Instead, the Players Association is doubling down on the idea that this fracturing doesn't exist. Well, we know better, and so does the league. And so further to this damage control, we actually had Breanna Stewart get on ESPN and make a statement herself. And this statement right here is just further proof of what we have been talking about in terms of the denials only serving to reinforce the actual truth of the situation, which is that any sort of dissension will be met with making sure that you come back into lockstep and toe the party line. Because here is what Breanna Stewart had to say on Wednesday.
Strike is definitely on the table because, we're negotiating for the best deal possible. And as everybody knows, we have approved have the strike authorization vote ready. So that leverage isn't going away. Do we want to do it? No, we don't. But if we have to, we will.
She's not wrong in saying that there is going to be that we will use the strike authorization if necessary, but the tone that she is taking here and the verbiage that she is using is exactly the verbiage that has been approved by the Players Association. It is exactly the messaging that the Players Association wants to be put out there. It is not what they were saying at all in the Unrivaled meetings on Monday. It is not what she has been saying within the past few weeks about being optimistic. This is the Players Association trying to recoup some of the leverage that they have lost over the past week or so, not just because of Breanna Stewart and Kelsey Plum's statements, but because of the agents' letters going out last week saying that they would like a seat at the table, and because of kind of all of the reporting that has been done regarding this fracturing within the player base. It is an attempt by the Players Association to give their strike threat more credibility. And I'm sorry, but it's just too late at this point. We already know exactly what the player base is, and that is, it is not unified to the degree that it would have to be in order for a strike to be effective. Secondly, in addition to the WNBA statements, they also put out this graphic on their Instagram. This is the results, or one of the results, of their survey that they put out last week to the player base regarding the way forward. And they put this out as a show of solidarity, as a show of unity, but I'm not sure the graphic actually says what the Players Association thinks it says. The graphic is a sample question that was put on that survey. And the question was, would you accept the league's proposal of 50% of net revenue, which is less than 15% of gross revenue, in an 8-year deal, or ask the union to keep negotiating? And the total number in favor of continuing to negotiate was 84%. No, I would not accept 15% and want the union to keep negotiating. Here are the problems with this graphic. Number one, it is factually inaccurate. According to all reporting that is available right now, the league's offer is 70% of net revenue, not 50%. And so to release this graphic as the statement that the WNBA players are making regarding the league's most recent offer, it does not give us a clear picture of how the player base would feel about the actual current offer on the table, which is 70% of net revenue. Would the number change from 84%? Maybe, maybe not. We have no way of knowing because we don't know the result of that question that has been asked, so it's misleading on its face. Secondly, 84% of players that would be in favor of continuing to negotiate necessarily means that there is 16% of your player base that want you to settle right now with this 50% of net revenue, even though a better offer is currently on the table. 16% of your player base is a not insignificant number, and it just continually underlines the fact that you have a significant fracture in your player base. Is 16% enough to not do a strike? Probably not, but once those numbers start going up to 70% of net revenue, which is what the actual offer is, 4 percentage points off of that 84% number, now we're down to 80%. If it were more than 4 percentage points, now we're in the 70s. And so it's very close to a number already, even though it is not an accurate question, it's already close to a number where a strike is not feasible. And then finally, this question is an extremely leading question. It does not ask the actual important information, which is, when is negotiating no longer an option? When do you want to pull the trigger on a strike? And we know from reporting, Howard Megdal, there was an interesting article that he wrote on the 9 Sports, the question about when do you want to strike versus when do you want to settle was never asked. And that is the most important question that needs to be asked by the Players Association by far. And the wording of this question is such that it is a question that is not in search of an answer. It is a question in which the answer has already been determined. There is no reasonable player that would say, put your swords down right now, even though there is time left on the clock. The question is, when do we stop negotiating? When do we put down our swords? When do we settle versus when do we strike? And that question was not asked. And according to reporting from Howard Megdal, the fact that that question was not asked is deeply disturbing to a significant portion of the player base. So this league survey is not worth very much in terms of actual player sentiment. And that is kind of a problem that we're seeing over and over again, is that we have a portion of leadership that has already determined the outcome, but now they're just searching for data to back that outcome up. And we've already seen from the Breanna Stewart interview that any even member of the executive committee that is in dissent of this predetermined outcome is being essentially told to get in line. And that's not the way that a players association should work. And all of this comes to a head in the Annie Constable article that was released yesterday, March the 5th, in which she went to New York and interviewed Terri Carmichael Jackson herself. And this interview is very telling on a number of different levels. I think that you're hearing that there is a discomfort with what's been playing out, Jackson said when asked about the letter. I don't know that there's a discomfort with what they're doing. This is factually in direct opposition to the Kelsey, Plum, and Breanna Stewart letter that was sent, because there are several ways in which the letter outlined that there are significant problems with what the Players Association is doing, and that is not related to the negotiation between the Players Association and the league. And so at that point, somebody is not telling the truth, right? Either Kelsey, Plum, and Breanna Stewart made up the circumstances that caused them to send that 3-page letter, or Terri Carmichael Jackson is misrepresenting the facts here. And I know which side of the fence I'm on about that. I'll leave the decision as to which side of the fence you're on to you. But somebody is not telling the truth here. I hear the frustration, she continued. I hear the emotions and the range of them as the result of the league putting pressure on the players, the league dragging this out. The one thing I said to the players is they have one tool, and their tool is to outwait you. And this, I think, is super important. It is a super important quote by Terri Carmichael Jackson. It cuts to the core of the WNBA PA's negotiating strategy, and that is their belief that the league can only outweight the player base, and that if the player base just waits long enough, eventually the league will crack. And this is inaccurate, and it only is half of the battle when it comes to negotiation strategy. And I want to be really clear about this. It is not enough just to outweight your opponent in negotiating strategies. You have to create conditions in which it is less painful for your negotiating opponent to come to the table and agree to your terms than it would be for them to refuse your terms. So in this specific situation, as the Players Association, you have to create the conditions in which it is less painful for the league to accept your terms, whatever those terms are, than it would be to endure a strike, than it would be to shut the league down, than it would be to perhaps never have another WNBA game again. And it is the league's contention right now that it would be less painful to do the latter, to shut down the league, to never have another game again, than it would be to have games under the players' proposal. Is that true? Is that not true? We don't know, because we don't have the league opening their books. But that is a circumstance that the Players Association is going to have to deal with. The Players Association has to present a deal to the league in which, even by the league's own numbers, it's less painful for them to continue to operate than it would be for them to shut down entirely. And that is what the Players Association is not understanding. Just creating a strike, if you are not commensurately offering a deal that is less painful than the strike, you are not offering the league a circumstance that they're even going to consider accepting, because they're in the business of making money. And if they make less money by operating than by not operating under your proposal, then there's no way that they're going to accept it. That is basic strategy and negotiation. And so the only way for the player base to get out of this is to offer them a compromise deal. Very smart people have already been saying for months now that the number 22% gross revenue is a number that probably would be a number that is accepted by the league and acceptable by the league. Is that number acceptable by the player base? Obviously not, since they haven't offered it just yet. But the circumstances with which the league would calculate that it is less painful to continue to operate than it would be to cease operations forever, that is the number that we are probably looking at. And so whether the player base decides to strike or not, regardless of how long you wait, the league is not going to move until you give them a reason to move. And that is the fundamental misunderstanding and miscalculation that the player base is making right now. They have not given the league a condition with which it is less painful to continue to operate than it would be to cease operations. And until the Players Association is willing to give the league those sets of circumstances, it doesn't matter how long they strike for. It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter what alternate leagues they create or participate in. None of that matters. If the fundamental calculation is that it is less profitable to operate than to not operate, then the ownership will never give in. And that is the problem. So that's what we're looking at right now. We're looking at a players association that is so fractured that it cannot even determine a path forward, let alone give the league an option that they might be willing to consider accepting. And until we see that circumstance come about, we're not going to see a deal anytime soon. And again, the clock is ticking. We have 4 days left for the Players Association to get itself together, get itself in a room with the league, and hammer this out. And right now, I just really don't see a way for that to take place. I hope that that is what's happening. I hope that somebody smart has gotten hold of the Players Association and gotten them to understand that a strike is not going to do what they think it is going to do. It is not going to force ownership to the table until you give them a reason to come back to it. And that reason and that calculation is possible right now without the strike. You just have to offer that compromised position. In other news, we have Team USA starting on March the 7th with training camp. That is tomorrow. And their first game is going to be in San Juan, Puerto Rico on March the 11th. And we have some good news here. TNT Sports has acquired the rights to broadcast those FIBA qualifying games, all FIBA qualifying games, in fact, that Team USA is participating in starting next week. So people have been asking a lot about how can we tune in to see the return of Caitlin Clark, to see the return of Team USA, to see them participate in the San Juan tournament. This is how. So we're looking at a schedule Wednesday, March the 11th. That is next Wednesday. At 4:45 Eastern, the USA versus Senegal on True TV and HBO Max. Thursday, March the 12th at 7:45 Eastern, Puerto Rico versus the USA. Saturday, March the 14th, 4:45, USA versus Italy. Sunday, March 15th, 1:45 Eastern, New Zealand versus the USA. And then finally, Tuesday, March 17th at 4:45 p.m., Spain versus the USA. And I cannot tell you how excited I am for this. It is the return of Caitlin Clark to a basketball court for the first time since July. And let's take a look at the roster that's going to be participating. Here it is. Caitlin Clark, Derica Hamby, Kelsey Plum, Paige Beckers, Kalia Copper, Ryan Howard, Angel Reese, Ray Burrell, Chelsea Gray, Kiki Irafin, Jackie Young, and Monique Billings. And you may be wondering, Monique Billings? What about Aaliyah Boston? Unfortunately, Aaliyah Boston and Sonny Citron had been injured recently in their participation in Unrivaled. That kept Aaliyah Boston out of the Unrivaled playoffs, which her team, the Phantom, ended up losing the final round to the Mist. Congratulations, by the way, to the Mist. But Aaliyah and Sonia Citron's injuries will unfortunately keep them out of this qualifying appearance. That doesn't mean that they're off of Team USA or anything like that. They can still participate in future qualifying rounds and certainly in the FIBA World Cup, and obviously moving forward to the Olympics. This does not eliminate them from that participation. However, they're not going to be able to participate next week. And so this is going to be it. This is going to be what we're going to see next week in Team USA's participation. We know that we're going to have those televised on TNT, and I'm just so excited to see Caitlin back on a basketball court officially for the first time since July, and that is something to look forward to. All this CBA stuff aside, which I don't think is going to be worked out by the deadline. I think that we are going to necessarily start looking at missing games, but fortunately we do have Team USA basketball to keep us satiated in the meantime. Hopefully, since a lot of the Players Association Executive Committee, with the exception of Kelsey, Plum, are not participating in the World Cup, hopefully that gives them some additional time to figure something out, hopefully. But that's kind of where we're at. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been the CC Report. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I wish that we could give you a more positive update regarding the CBA, but at least we have the Team USA qualifying to look forward to next week. After that, we're going to be in the throes of March Madness. So we've got a lot of great basketball coming up after March Madness. Hopefully we will have some sort of resolution on the CBA and we can start talking about next steps then. But ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed this, please make sure you like the video, comment below on when do you think that we're going to have a CBA in hand. What do you think about the replacement of Aaliyah Boston by Monique Billings? What do you think about the replacement of Sony Citron with Ray Burrell? Just let me know in the comments what you think. Please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Current status is that we are just about 200 subscribers to the channels, which is just amazing. I really appreciate all of your support, and hopefully we can continue it into a fever season and beyond. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been CC Report, and we'll see you in the next one.